All right, so we just finished talking about Proposition 2, which is multiplicity, employing multiple speech codes within a particular setting. Proposition 3 is substance. And what that means, this is where we're really starting to get to the idea of culture. Philipson argued that speech codes have particular kind of substance, which means they tell us something about the culture. So they tell us three things, right? They tell us something about the psychology, the sociology, and the rhetoric of a culture. So every speech code tells us something about the people who use them in the society. So first, a speech code tells us something about how a community views individuals. What it does is it tells us who's most valued. I did not mean to go forward on that. Anyway, it tells us about something who's most valued, right? It tells us about how people are within that particular kind of setting. Does that setting see people as within Teamsterville, for example, people are there to try to keep the power structure in place. Or the Nakamura, people are there to try to express their individual differences. Those tell us something wildly different about how that society views individuals based on that. Now, this is different than the sociology, which tells us how individuals function within the particular kind of culture. Like, what's the role of speech? What is your job within that society, right? And so your job within Teamsterville, for example, is to try and communicate in ways that keep those power structures clear and alive, right? That don't challenge the power structure. Your job within Nakamura is to talk and to make good talk and to engage in meta communication, to encourage other people to talk as well. We also talk about rhetoric here, right? Proposition 3 tells us that it's about discovering truth. What is true within a society? So, for example, honor is something that's valued very highly in Teamsterville. A lot of what goes into how Teamsterville men treat their women has to do with honor. It's about protecting certain kind of people, and within Nakamura's dignity, right? The dignity of your individual expressivity that's supposed to be is what's true. That's what's true for those particular kind of cultures. That's how they see the world. Anyway, we'll skip that. We don't need to go into that. Proposition 4, interpretation. Who are the people who are most likely able to correctly interpret what's happening in speech code? Philipson says it's the people within that particular kind of speech code. People outside of that community can't really know what is going on within that community when they engage in communication. And this goes back to some of that ethnography stuff that we were talking about. Because remember, we said ethnography takes seriously the idea that you can't understand a culture unless you put your body in it. Well, this is what's happening in ethnography, is you become a part of that culture, so you're able to better interpret that communication. You're better able to know what's going on. And what an ethnographer does is she listens to the words that people use and try to figure out how those speech acts are understood. Try to make sense of those speech codes by actually participating in them, because Philipson argues that's the only way we can adequately understand culture. Philipson also says that the terms, rules, and premises of the speech code are woven into the speaking themselves. What we mean here is you shouldn't have to look outside of the particular site to understand what's going on. Everything you need to go about the speech code happens within kind of the ecology of that particular kind of culture. The way that Philipson said we need to look for this is we look for patterns in who talks to whom, in what settings, towards what ends, about what kind of topics. And what we tend to see is patterns that emerge over and over again. Philipson keyed in on two particular kind of patterns that are not unique to him, right? They've come before him, and he says we can see these happening in sites over and over again. He talks about the idea of social dramas, which are public confrontations where one party invokes a moral rule based on this culture to challenge the conduct of another. He uses that example of the Mayor Daley speech, where Mayor Daley appointed the son of a friend to an important political office. And what ended up happening is, there were public confrontations about the moral rule of nepotism. People said, you can't do that. Well, within Teamsterville, people challenged the challengers and saying, because units are really important. Who knows who's important? Power. And they said, what is he supposed to do? Appoint his enemies to be in that position? Now, we have social dramas all the time, and they follow particular kind of scripts. So, even within a classroom, for example, sometimes I'll assign an exam or I'll assign a quiz, right? And everyone will go, right? Which is kind of a public way of saying, hey, that's not fair. You shouldn't be giving us a quiz on this for blank reason, right? A public confrontation whereby parties challenge each other. He also said we tend to see totemizing rituals, which are careful performances that are very structured and play out around a particular sacred object. He talks about Nakamura's good talk. It does that. He says it follows a particular kind of pattern of initiation, you acknowledge, negotiate, and reaffirm. So he said every time Nakamura people tend to get into conflict with each other, this is how they settle it. Through a careful performance that's structured, that moves from one to the next, to the next, to the next step. And that's how they make sense of that particular setting. The last one here is force, where he says that we can generally predict how people will communicate based on what speech community that person comes from. And he says that the shared use of the speech code is a sufficient condition for predicting that. He says if you tell me what speech code, what culture you come from, I can tell you how you're going to talk. This is where he moves to the idea of prediction, which is outside of the realm of interpretive theory, and that's where some people actually get a little bit upset with this theory and say, hey, great up until this proposition. This is one that isn't, that goes beyond what theories are supposed to do that are interpretive. And some people also say, hey, this is stereotyping. What you're advocating here is stereotyping, saying, I can tell you how people are going to talk if I know what culture they come from. Phillipson says, well, even if it's stereotyping, it's true. So this is an interpretive theory, so let's put it through. Does it give us a new understanding of people? I think speech codes are kind of intuitive, right? But it gives us a good language for understanding how it is that it happens and why different cultures communicate with each other differently. Clarification of value, he's right up front, right? And he even says, I'm going to try to push this interpretive theory, and I'm going to try to move it into the prediction realm as well. Aesthetic appeal, I think it's very high on aesthetic appeal. I think it does an excellent job of being attractive theory. Discussion and community of agreement. This is a huge area within communication studies. Lots of people talk about this theory. So yes, it's very, very high on that. Finally, reformed society. Well, perhaps, right? Perhaps it helps us understand why people talk the way that they do and what's happening within cultures when they talk to each other this way. So anyway, put it through your own critique. Let me know what you think.